Hey, home church, welcome into the final week of our February series, Passion. We've been talking about this for the month of February, what it looks like to have a passion for God. Last week, we talked about maybe what it looks like when you've lost your passion and how you can get that back. So today, let's jump into it. I want to start off by telling you something this morning that's probably not going to be a good news, feel good, pick me up kind of thing. On your own, you're not enough. You're really not. And neither am I. We're not enough. We're not good enough. We're not talented enough. And our efforts will never be enough on our own. But when we are used by God, His goodness works through us. His power works through us. And our efforts fade and our willingness shines as God magnifies our effort and does something great with what we can do for Him. So, having a passion for God, first and foremost, means that you let God work through you and in you. And it can't be just one. Well, I let God work in me, and so now I come to church. Well, that's not necessarily God working in you. If God is working in you, He's changed you, and you are going to go find other people to come to Him so that they can be changed too. So, if you have a passion for God, you need to understand that no act is insignificant. It doesn't matter how small you think it is, you can still do something for the kingdom of God. You might think it is insignificant, but what God can do with it makes it significant. Throughout the Bible, we all remember the heroes. Do you remember who was in the lion's den? Yeah, that was Daniel. Who was in the furnace? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Who killed the giant with a stone? Well, we all know that's David. Who built the ark? Well, that was Noah. Well, who walked on water? Peter. Who led the children of Israel out of Egypt? That was Moses. Who was sold by his brothers but ended up saving them? Well, that was Joseph. We remember all of those people, right? But what about the heroes that don't get named? Because there's some people that did some really big things for God that we really don't know who they are, but they had a passion for God. Remember the story about Nehemiah. If you know the story, it starts off in chapter 1 where Nehemiah finds out that the walls are destroyed around Jerusalem. Chapter 2 tells us that he got permission from the king. And then chapter 3 is when the repairs start. And in chapter 1, after Nehemiah tells us about hearing the news about the walls and about how bad things are, we get this verse. Verse 11 of chapter 1 says, I was cupbearer to the king. Nehemiah had been carried off as a captive. He was a slave, and he was the cupbearer to the king. Now, why do you think Nehemiah reminded us that he was a cupbearer to the king? Well, because in chapter 2, we have Nehemiah getting a lot of permission to help him with what he wanted to do and going back and building the wall. And so he wanted us to know in verse 11 that he had close proximity to power. As children of God, we need to understand today that we have close proximity to power. We are God's children, and we have close proximity to the power that we have through Him. In chapter 2, we see that having a position close to the king helps Nehemiah get the help he needed to rebuild the walls. And then in chapter 3, it tells us the groups or the families that repaired each gate or each section of the wall. And each group or family took a small section. So here's what I want to know. Can you name them? Can you name all of them? Can you name any of them? Probably not. We don't remember the specific names of the people in the book of Nehemiah who rebuilt the walls around the city of Jerusalem. But if we can't name them, Does that mean that their contribution was insignificant? Absolutely not. These people did something big for God. Now, Mark 12, 41 through 44 says, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. So Jesus takes a seat after teaching, and he wants to sit right across from where people are dropping their money in. And it says that many rich people threw in a large amount, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Now, Jesus is watching this play out, and he sees these rich people coming, and they're just dumping money into the treasury. And then he sees the widow come, and she puts in just a couple of copper coins. And then what Jesus does next is, calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others, because the others gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." Now, if I stood up here and I asked our congregation, I said, "Hey, I want you to get out the checkbook, and I want you to see what the balance is in your checkbook, and I want you to write a check. Write a check to the church for everything that you have in your checking account." How many people do you think would come back the next week? Probably not very many, right? We're not comfortable trusting God that much, to be honest. But this lady, out of her poverty, gave everything that she had to live on. And Jesus points out that the rich gave, and they still had a lot. They gave out of their wealth. But this widow, she gave all she had. So let me ask you a question. What's her name? We don't know. We never find out her name. We're never told her name. But we know that she had a big faith. And don't sleep on this. She took a huge step of faith, and in doing so, she gave all of us a lesson on how to be faithful and trust that God will take care of his children. And we need to remember that lesson today. What she had to give was not insignificant, and neither is what you have to give to the kingdom of God either. In John 6, 1 through 15, Jesus sees a crowd of people, and he asks where they can buy bread to feed the crowd. And Philip chimes in, and Philip says that it would take half a year's wage to feed this crowd. And then Andrew shows up with the solution. And his solution is the boy who shared his lunch. Now, in 8 and 9, it says, another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish." And it's almost like Andrew thought, "Hey, I've got something." And then once he started saying it out loud, he was like, "Oh, this does not sound like a good idea." He says, "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish." And then he says, "But how far will they go among so many?" Yeah, maybe this was a bad idea. Maybe I shouldn't have brought this boy up here. But with 5,000 men to feed, plus women and children, this lunch probably seemed insignificant. I hope my boys are like this boy. I hope my boys just bring something to God and they say, "Here you go, multiply it. Here you go, do something with it. I'm willing, so you do something with it." This boy, who was not named, stepped up and got to play a part in one of Jesus' most famous miracles. If you start talking to people about the miracles that Jesus did, they're going to talk about walking on the water. They're going to talk about raising people from the dead. And I guarantee you they're always going to talk about Jesus feeding the 5,000. And this boy, who we don't even know his name, got to play a part in it because he said, "Here's what I have, and I'm willing to give it to the kingdom." That's a big thing. The sweet spot. This is when your love for God and your willingness to tell people about him and the opportunity all meet. You know, a golf club has a sweet spot right there in the center of the face of the club. If you look at my golf clubs, you'll see that the sweet spot on mine's pretty clean because I don't hit it very much, right? I swing the club a lot, but I don't hit the sweet spot very much. It's all around it. When you're playing baseball and you just hear that perfect crack off the bat, it's because it hit the sweet spot. So we have two examples today that certainly ended up being significant because the sweet spot was just right there. Somebody's love for God and their willingness to tell people about Him and the opportunity all met. And these two people did not think that was insignificant. They jumped at the opportunity. We know the story of David. But how did David find his way to the palace in the first place? Well, it was the servant of a tormented king that brought David into the palace. In 1 Samuel 16, 17 and 18, Saul is being tormented by a spirit. It said that God had removed his spirit from Saul, and he was being tormented by an evil spirit. And one of the servants said, maybe you should find someone who can play the lyre, and when you're tormented, they will come and play, and maybe the spirit will leave you. So Saul said to his attendants, find someone who plays well and bring him to me. And one of the servants answered, I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the lyre. He's a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well and is a fine-looking man, and the Lord is with him. The servant of a tormented king is how David found his way into the palace the first time. This servant said, I'm not going to miss the opportunity to tell the king about this man of God, somebody that we know as a man after God's own heart. Remember the story of Naaman? In 2 Kings, we're told that Naaman was a commander of the army for the king of Aram. And that is a significant position. That is a big deal. We're told he was a valiant soldier, but we're also told Naaman had leprosy. And that's something that you don't make it back from. In that day and time, there was no cure. You were just an outcast until this disease ended up taking your life. Naaman's wife, being the commander's wife, had some perks. And Naaman had a slave who was taken captive from Israel. She was taken as part of the people who when the king conquered Israel, they took back some of the young people to be slaves. And she was the slave to Naaman's wife. And we never learn her name. We're just told that she's a slave. It's kind of terrible to just be known like that. It's a slave. We don't even get to know the name. But in 2 Kings 5, 2 and 3, the slave steps up and knocks it out of the park. It says, now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and taken captive a young girl from Israel. And she served Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. She knew, the slave of Naaman's wife knew exactly where Naaman could find healing. And she didn't let her position or her status as a slave girl keep her from telling people what she knew. Why should we? Well, I don't have the status. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a teacher. I'm not on the praise team. I'm not this or that. Nothing should keep us from telling people what we know about Jesus Christ. In these situations, none of these people are named. But are they significant? Well, yeah. Their actions certainly were significant. And so are yours. If you will allow God to work in you and through you, anything that you do for Him will be significant. I promise you that. And we hope to see you this Sunday back on campus as we jump into our next sermon series called The Ripple. We hope to see you soon. If not, keep up with what we're doing here online. We love you.